Alrighty guys, a very warm welcome to the video. So we've just had the running of Ironman 70.3 Indian Wells Pro event and women's event. The pro event taken out by Sam Long, women's by Paula Finlay, and some news coming out about Lionel Sanders, who ended up finishing the day in a decent performance of 4th place. However, he was the defending champion for all the previous years of this event, and you know, people were expecting a little bit more from him. And one thing that was surprising was his swim time coming out the water significantly or a substantial amount of time behind what was expected. Particularly, you know, he'd usually swim around similar time to someone like Sam Long, and he was a fair while back there. And I haven't heard this from his mouth exactly. I'm sure there'll be a video coming out from Lionel about this to confirm exactly. But what was reported was that some of the spectators actually noticed Lionel having to sit up and kind of catch his breath early in the swim, which indicates that he's likely had somewhat of a panic attack or a hyperventilation. So this is not uncommon in cold water or extreme cold water, particularly if you're not adapted. So, you know, one thing before we get into some of these cold water swimming tips that I hopefully, you know, think can help anyone who struggles with cold water swimming or is a little bit worried about it, particularly in the open water, because open water is a lot more confronting than just swimming in the pool. But nonetheless, just to say that, you know, for Lionel to come out of the water, you know, very close to, well, very much near the back end of the field, work his way up into 4th place, I think it does go to show the, you know, the mentality of Lionel and the strength of Lionel. So great performance there nonetheless, but ultimately, you know, he will be disappointed that his swim was so far off the pace. So this is a serious, you know, thing to have happen. If you have a panic attack in the water, it will be very, very scary because you're in the open water. You can't just go and stand up on land and kind of just recover. You know, you're exposed, you're vulnerable. So some tips of swimming in cold water. Obviously, we have the general ones. Double cap. You know, you're going to keep your head warmer, or even wearing neoprene cap. And this is, I actually saw Lionel wearing one of these. So he had the neoprene cap on. And so that's pretty basic, you know, keep the head warm. Number 2, a properly fitted wetsuit. And what I mean by this is having a wetsuit which is fitted well for you and is not either, well, obviously you never want your wetsuit too loose, but it's not too constricted, particularly around the chest area. Because when you're in the cold water and you kind of, it takes your breath away a bit and you're gasping for air, and then you are trying to also swim hard, the last thing that is going to help is a feeling of constriction in the chest. So a wetsuit that's not too tight around this chest area may help to alleviate at least some of the mental kind of, you know, anguish around having that panic attack and feeling like your chest is all constricted. So that's very important. Properly fitted wetsuit is super, super important. Number 3, and this is one that I think Lionel probably didn't do, practice swimming in cold water weeks, not days before the race. So, and preferably in open water. So he did do a post on Instagram about 3 or 4 days ago, I saw, and he said, I've started my cold water desensitization. And he was in his pool or a swimming pool getting in the cold water in a wetsuit. So that's all good and well, but I think if you're going to try and desensitize to the cold or adapt to the cold, you need to be doing this at minimum weeks in advance, preferably months. You know, like things don't happen overnight, and to try and adapt or make changes from a physiological standpoint, from your ability to resist, you know, the cold water or to build resilience against it, it's not going to happen in the matter of a few days. So this is very important. Weeks, preferably even months. If you know you have a cold event coming up, just even once a week and then twice a week, just getting some exposure there. Very important. And then I say preferably open water as well, because again, this is the mentality of it. I think obviously panic attack is a physical response, but there's a huge mental cascade of events that lead you down there, as well as the actual physical shock of the cold water. So open water is a lot more confronting than just swimming in a swimming pool, and swimming in a cold pool versus the same level of coldness or temperature in open water will be vastly different because provided like you got the same setup, wetsuit, etc. Because in the open water, you can't just kind of stop and grab onto a wall. So that the idea of safety or being more vulnerable is very much heightened in cold water. So the body senses it as a lot more of a risk, to your life, really. So that's why getting exposure to the cold is important. But if you can do it in the ocean, always swim with someone else. Always swim with someone who can be looking out for you. But I think that's very important just to desensitize to the idea of being out in the open and getting used to that. Number 4, longer warm up than usual. So obviously, like anything on the race day, the first time, no matter how sensitized you are, you put your head in the cold, you're probably going to gasp. So putting the head under the water, getting a longer warm up. If you normally do a 5-minute warm up before the race, do a 10, 15-minute warm up. Maybe even 15-minute warm up. Do a 3 times longer warm up. It's really not going to take much away from your performance. You just got to be more organized, get down there on time, and keep your head under the water, and just kind of endure that pain of the cold, the intenseness of the cold before, whilst that you're not actually racing. Because when you're racing, you're trying to go flat out. So the heart rate's going to be, obviously this is the purpose of the warm up, get the heart rate up, etc. But if you're putting your head in the cold and you're not properly warmed up and then you're trying to go hard and that heart rate's spiking and then you're starting to panic like, oh, I can't breathe, that's where it's going to be really hard. So ensuring you get a really long warm up, way longer than you'd normally do, or at least substantially longer than you'd normally do, very important. The next thing, number 5, cold exposure. So I think this is very important as well. If you are someone who struggles with cold, and even if you're not, there is benefits to cold exposure therapy in general, whether it's a cold plunge, whether it's doing cold showers for a particular amount of time each day. There are benefits to the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, to your immune system, your overall resistance and capacity to deal with stress. So cold exposure, I would say, is good for athletes in general. It's not going to make you substantially fitter, but it can help with recovery. It can help with just stress tolerance and also just everyday stress. But I think this is a good way as well. If you know that you have an event coming up where you're going to be in cold water, then doing that cold exposure can really help. And I remember seeing those videos of Lionel with Chris Lieto, or staying at his house in Kona, and everyone was getting in the cold plunge, uncomfortable, but pretty controlled. And Lionel just immediately went into a panic. So it's obviously something that he struggles with, and learning to control your breathing, regulate your breath, and just be more in control of your mindset and body in general when you're in that heightened state of stress, by doing a cold plunge, by doing cold showers, can really help to desensitize you to that stimulus. Number 6, mindset. So I think the only reason I put this here is because I think mindset's very important in terms of, let's put it this way. If you think of Lionel, for example, he's going to, I would, maybe I'm completely off on this point, but potentially Lionel could be thinking, all right, I'm not as strong a swimmer as many of these guys. I need to have a good swim. So he's putting a lot of pressure on that swim. So he's already in a heightened state of anxiety because of that. So he's putting pressure on it. He's got to go, well, I've got to go out hard, I've got to get on the feet. Whereas someone who's a very strong swimmer and knows that they're going to be front pack regardless, and even if they go 90 or 95% in the swim and not 100%, then they're going to get in the front pack. They're going to be a lot more relaxed about the swim start. It doesn't really matter if I don't get on the feet straight away. I'll probably just get on them anyway. So I'm a strong swimmer. So Lionel's going to be, or a weaker swimmer, I should say. Lionel's not a weak swimmer. A swimmer who's not as fast as the front pack generally is going to be a lot more stressed at the start of the race. So being able to, again, this comes down to controlling your thoughts and all that kind of stuff. And we're getting a little bit into a different realm, but coming of that mindset that, okay, look, it is what it is. I'm going to do my race, and to try and not to be extremely anxious prior to even starting, because then that's going to just compound. Anxiety is going to compound, the cold's going to compound, heart rate's through the roof, and you're going to be very prone to panicking. So there's another thing there. And then ultimately, I'll put at the end, just adapt, and just build very gradually. increase the amount of exposure you have on a weekly basis to cold water and increase the duration you do. If you can't swim in the cold water at all, then going out and doing 5 minutes might be a place to start. And then over the course of 10 weeks, you might get that up to half an hour in cold water. And then you're starting to desensitize, to adapt, and to regulate your capacity to actually swim in the cold water. So do it slowly, do it over a long period of time, and don't try and cram this stuff into like the week before the race. Because remember as well, cold exposure is it's a positive stress on the body in the terms of the physiological benefits it has, but it is still a stress on the body, and you don't want to be putting foreign stresses on the body in the actual race week. That's the last thing you want to be doing. So for example, if you never do cold plunges and then all of a sudden the week before the race you start doing them all the time and the system gets a little bit worn down because it's not fully used to it, well, that's probably not the best idea. So don't do anything new, I would say, generally. And everyone's going to vary. This is my opinion. Don't do anything new in the race week, and just build up slowly, get used to it, make it part of your routine if you know you have a race coming up and you struggle in the cold water. So hopefully you guys found that interesting. I'm sure there'll be much more information to come out on this topic in the near future, and probably a breakdown from Lionel about it as well. But nonetheless, a great performance after some adversity at the start. And yeah, leave any comments below. What do you think? Have you had experience with the cold, and negative experiences, positive experiences? How do you deal with it? Thanks, guys. Take care, and I will see you everyone in the next video.